Doctor Who Series 13. This is the most recent series to come out as of me recording this. Of course, we will do one of these videos for the 60th anniversary specials. As of you watching this video, they have already come out, presumably, because this is well after the actual date of the 60th anniversary special. I'm recording this about a month in advance, and we still don't have clear evidence of when the 3 episodes for the 60th anniversary are going to drop. So stay tuned for that video to come out hopefully in the next couple weeks. We'll basically be doing it very shortly like this, and then we'll do a whole ranking those episodes on top of all of the other episodes. But today we're going through every episode in Doctor Who Flux, that is Series 13, including then the 2022 Jodie Whittaker specials. So that includes the New Year special, Eve of the Daleks. That includes the roughly Easter special, Legend of the Sea Devils, and then the BBC Centenary special called The Power of the Doctor. I figured it would fit a lot better to merge those into one video just because there's so few episodes that made up the final couple years of the Chibnall Whittaker era. But the good news for this series is that we don't have anything in F tier, which is good. That's something new that hasn't happened in quite a while on these ranking videos. But we should talk about Flux in whole. So Flux is the first time that Doctor Who in the new era, the 2005 revived series, that they actually did serialized storytelling. Now, there were story arcs starting with Series 1. There were 2-parters, there were 3-parters, there were overarching narratives in each series, but Flux is the first one where each episode is not a standalone episode. And for the sake of ranking all of those episodes, that's when it gets kind of confusing, because you have the storyline with the Doctor, you have the storyline with the Doctor's companions, you have the storyline with Unit and Kate Stewart and the Grand Serpent, you have the Joseph Williamson stuff, you have the stuff with Carvanista, you have the stuff with Bell and Vinder, you have the stuff with Swarm and Azura. There's a lot going on here. And so for the sake of me remembering what happens in each episode, I will be using a cheat sheet. I have seen each of these episodes at least twice. I actually really enjoyed Flux when it aired. Obvious flaws for me in watching the episodes, but I thought overall Flux did a great job with the serialized storytelling. I think it's one of the more consistent runs of episodes in the Chibnall era. You've seen my rankings presumably yesterday and the day before for Series 11 and 12. But let's talk about them, each individual episode. We're going to start with, in D tier, I think the weakest of these 9 episodes, that being Legend of the Sea Devils. And I am under the assumption, from what I've seen in the fandom, that Legend of the Sea Devils is regarded as the weakest of all of these episodes. To me, that's the case. Legend of the Sea Devils, I've only seen twice. It's a very forgettable episode. I, as a fan of Doctor Who since 2013-ish, 2014, the Sea Devils were a classic Who monster that I always wanted to return. I thought it would be fitting to do a series or a story with both the Sea Devils and the Silurians. They went straight for the Sea Devils in this. It's the first time they'd ever shown up on Doctor Who's revived series. It's not very good. They do a cool job with the atmosphere. It's, is it 1800s China? I'd have to check my timeline. This is me plugging my timeline video again. Go check it out on the channel under the Doctor Who playlist. There's a 2-hour-long entire linear timeline of Doctor Who. It takes place, there's a flashback to a few centuries prior to the episode, talking about just the history of the Sea Devils in ancient China. I think the acting is fine. The big thing that drags this episode down is the special effects. The characters are very weightless in this episode. Apart from the live action sets, nothing looks very good. The Sea Devils, I think, look fine for the most part. I don't love the update. I like the Silurian update more than I like their classic design. I know the Silurian update was controversial when it came out in 2010. That was another Chibnall episode, actually. But Legend of the Sea Devils is really just forgettable. The plot is... don't make me pull out the plot, because I actually do know the plot. Basically, they need this kind of mystery box token in order to take over the world, and the Doctor doesn't want to give it to him, blah, blah, blah. Doctor sends them all to space. It's a very forgettable Doctor Who episode. I like that they're kind of delving into the Asian mythology type stuff. Asia is not a place that Doctor Who has really endeavored in the past. I think it's interesting that they chose the Sea Devils as part of this kind of pirate adventure. The premise and the expectations of this episode are let down by what we actually get. I think the script is very weak. I think, like I said, the acting is very mid. Most of the characters are very forgettable. The character motivations are very forgettable. I think this is a very, very bottom of D tier episode. Saved out of F tier, I think, by the design of the sets and just the costuming. And the feel of this episode is a lot better than the episode itself. So we're putting that one bottom of D tier. Let's move up then to the Vanquishers. Yeah, the Vanquishers has got to stay in D tier. So this is... Let me see which one Vanquishers is here. I want to say it's this one. No, let's try this one here. I want to say that's the scene. You can't really see it. It's a really bad still, which is my fault. But I want to say this is the one. I want to say this is the still from when the Doctor meets herself as Time. The Vanquishers is a mess. It's got too many story beats going all over the place. So we start this episode. Let me find it here. The Vanquishers, we start this episode. The Doctor's split in 3. And one of them meets up with the companions on Earth, right? One of them meets with Vinder and Diane in the passenger vessel, and then one of them is stuck on Time, if I remember correctly. So you get... The problem with Flux is because of the pandemic, they basically rushed what should have been 10 episodes into 6. And this is the episode where you feel that it falls apart the most. There's too many storylines going on. There's not really a conclusive conclusion, for lack of a better phrase, to a very, very large story. The story of Flux has a lot of loose ends, and they tried to really throw them all together here. The personification of Time was kind of weird, very weird portrayal by Jodie Whittaker. The ending... How does this episode end, is what I'm trying to remember. Doctor throws her memories into the TARDIS. Yeah, it's a very weird ending to an episode. I just think I think all of the plot threads were either thrown away. All the stuff with Swarm and Azure and Time, and there's too much there that just doesn't land. I think all the stuff with Dan and... Is it Diane? Yes. Is kind of a weird ending. The stuff with Bell and Vinder is fun. Bringing in the Cybermen and the Daleks at the end is a little weird. It makes sense narratively, but it just feels very hobbled together. This is a very hobbled together episode. It's got to be D tier. It can't be any higher than that. It's a mess. But let's move up then to Once Upon Time. To me, Once Upon Time is probably the most forgettable episode in Flux. This is one where I really have to read what happens in Once Upon Time. So the Doctor is at the temple. Stalls Swarm by hiding Dan, Yaz, and Vinder in their past. So this is basically the flashback episode. It's narratively all over the place. This is where we meet Belle for the most part. Jumps into her own time stream, recovers memories of her past incarnation, the fugitive Doctor, and her time in the Division. I genuinely don't remember that much about this episode. It's revealed that she and Carvanista previously raided the temple to defeat Swarm. This is a follow-up episode from the Timeless Child arc. And I don't think any of it lands, and none of it's very memorable to most Doctor Who fans. This, like I said, probably the most forgettable of the episodes in Flux. Chris Chibnall tries to backtrack on what he did with the Timeless Child arc. Had this series had 10 episodes to play with, I think the stuff with the Doctor's past could have been actually somewhat interesting. I like the Ruth Doctor. We talked about it yesterday. I like all of the stuff with the fugitive Doctor. I just don't like narratively where this places the Doctor and the Doctor's history. very forgettable episode. There are significantly better episodes in Flux, and for me, that's why Once Upon a Time has to sit in D tier. I like the introduction of Belle. I think that's the best part of the episode, but everything else, all of the flashback stuff, super forgettable for me, and that's why I'm putting it in D tier. Let's move then to Survivors of the Flux. Survivors of the Flux, like I said, I'm sorry for the different stills in here. I want to say that this one is Survivors of the Flux. So this is after the doctor. It's the cliffhanger coming out of Village of the Angels. This is where the doctor is transported to the planet of time, right? Let's see here. Weeping Angels transport the doctor to the division where she meets the entity that previously chastised her, Tecteun. I think the fact that they recast Tecteun, well, it makes sense. It makes sense, but it's weird for us as the audience to see a different version of Tecteun than we were introduced to last season because it's a character we don't know. It makes sense that she would regenerate into a different body, but for us as the audience, it's a little jarring. Survivors of the Flux suffers from also being another flashback episode. We get the rewriting of history by the Grand Serpent, all of this stuff with Unit. The introduction of Kate Stewart, I think, is somewhat fun. The stuff with the companions is weird. They're basically trapped in the past for 3 years. They have to live, I think the word I used in the timeline video is contemporaneously. They have to live from the year 1901 to 1904, which means that Yaz has spent more time with Dan and Jericho than she ever did with the Doctor, which is a weird thing to think about narratively. Vinder goes into the passenger vessel at the end of this one. Yeah, it's another flashback episode, and that's part of the problem with Flux is that narratively it's all over the place. The 6 episodes really suffer. The pacing is really weird in both of these 2 episodes. A lot of the stuff in these 2 episodes, if you're not thinking about where things progress, can be very much like you forget them inside of themselves. The interactions between Jodie Whittaker and the actress who plays Tecteun are weird. The introduction of Swarm and Azure at the end is weird. We have too many threats all at once going at each other. And that's the problem with Flux. There's too many villains. There's not really a definitive, like, powerful villain. And I think that ruins the narrative of Flux, specifically in this episode, a little bit in The Vanquishers, the finale episode. But Survivors of the Flux, I think, would serve as a better finale had they decided to cut it off after Survivors of the Flux than The Vanquishers, even though it would have even shortened the runtime even more than it already did. That's all for D tier. Like, almost half of the 9 episodes are in D tier, which is not a great sign. Let's move up to C tier. Halloween Apocalypse. Halloween Apocalypse is a fun episode, but there's a lot of problems with it narratively. You feel the rush of the season with the pacing of this episode. I love the introduction to Dan. I think Dan is a super underutilized character. John Bishop's portrayal is fantastic. Dan's introduction is great. As a football fan, as a soccer fan, I love the fact that he just loves Liverpool, like lives next to Anfield, loves the city of Liverpool, is super into the history of Liverpool. That really doesn't get paid off anywhere except for the Joseph Williamson stuff. But it's fun that we have a Liverpudlian companion. It's did we ever have one in the classic series? Definitely the first Liverpudlian character in the new series. I think the introduction to Carbonista is weird. I think Carbonista becomes a fun character by the end of this episode. The chemistry between the Doctor and Yaz is very good in this episode. The introduction to the Flux is a little weirdly handled. Do we get introduced to Vinder in this episode? Yes. Yes, we get introduced to Vinder. We get a weird introduction to Claire in this episode. This episode is kind of cool for leaving cliffhangers, but the fact that a lot of those cliffhangers are very weirdly mixed together throughout the series in kind of a jumbled mess ruins this episode retrospectively to me. This aired on Halloween in 2021. I watched it live. It was a fun episode. It was a fine episode, but it's got a lot of problems, especially retrospectively going forward throughout the rest of the series. And then the ending, the cliffhanger feels a little rushed, a little forced. But otherwise, it's a mid episode, very mid episode, C tier for me. Let's move up to. Oh, do I really have it this low? It makes sense. Yeah, Power of the Doctor. Power of the Doctor is also a mess. The Power of the Doctor, to me, is probably... Okay, War of the Sontarans is fun. But, like, of all of these 9 episodes, I think the Power of the Doctor is the one that I enjoyed the most as a Doctor Who fan, right? You get to see the 5th Doctor, the 6th Doctor, the 7th Doctor, the 8th Doctor, and the 1st Doctor return. And you get the return of Graham, who's my favorite 13th Doctor companion. You get the return of Ace, who most Doctor Who fans love Ace. They return Tegan. I was never a huge Tegan fan. I don't love really any of the 5th Doctor's companions. I love the fact that they brought Mel back at the end. I love the fact that they brought Joe back at the end. They bring William Russell back as the very first companion, Ian Chesterton, and he holds the record for the longest time between portraying the same character on television. Does that make any sense? So his last portrayal of the character, I want to say, was 1965. I'm trying to remember or was it 64? I'm trying to remember when the last time William Russell showed up on screen, because he was supposed to show up during the, was it the 5th Doctor era? And they gave that role to the Brigadier because of scheduling conflicts. But anyway, he returns, and it's literally the world record for the longest time between playing a character in the same show. That's fun. I really like the stuff with the companions at the end, genuinely. Like, it bums me out that most of my favorite classic Who companions, their actors or actresses are now deceased, because, like, I would have loved to see Liz Shaw is my favorite classic Who companion. Would have loved to see her back. Sarah Jane Smith, obviously, Elizabeth Sladen is deceased, has been for over a decade now. I would have loved to see Grace Holloway back. That would be one, a companion completely forgot about. From an era almost completely forgot about. There's a lot of new love for the 8th Doctor, and I would have loved to see Grace back in that episode, or even some of the more modern companions, Martha Jones, or I'm trying to think ones that would work timeline-wise, because most of them are either in the past or dead. You could have brought back Jenna Coleman, technically, for that episode. But anyways, regardless of the point, this is a very fun episode. The story's a mess. I mean, this is from a writing perspective, this is a bad episode. There's too many plots going on. It's the typical Chibnall jump from one country to another, this sort of thing. There's too many villains going on at the same time. You got stuff with the Daleks, you got stuff with the Master. This is my favorite portrayal of the Master by Sacha Dhawan. I mentioned in yesterday's episode, I think Sacha Dhawan is at his best when the script calls for him to be manic. Because he's a very good manic actor, but only when the script calls for it. There are scenes where he is so vitriolic in his portrayal that he's literally spitting in some of these scenes. And in these scenes, compared to kind of the over-the-top campy stuff from Series 12, Sacha Dhawan plays it perfectly because the Master is desperate. The Master is desperate to win this time. The script supports that for the very first time with Sacha Dhawan's Master, and we feel that. Of course, it's got the stuff with Rasputin. This is a weird episode, man. I almost feel sometimes like I'm watching, History of the World Part 2, like the new Mel Brooks TV show. Yeah, it's a weird episode, man. It's fun. It's so fan servicey that you almost forget how bad of an episode this is. The plot makes zero sense. The dialogue is horrible. Like, the Master's dialogue is actually, for the most part, very good. But the rest of this episode, the script sucks. But I'm willing to forget. Like, I almost like watching this episode more than I like Day of the Doctor because there's more doctors in it. There's more fan servicey stuff in it than Day of the Doctor. But the episode sucks. Like, it's bad. But I have fun. So, Power of the Doctor, all the praises from a fan perspective. I loved Power of the Doctor when it came out. Episode sucks. C tier. Right above it, I'm going to put Eve of the Daleks. Eve of the Daleks is Doctor Who's version of Groundhog Day. What's the Edge of Tomorrow? Is that the kind of the sci-fi remake of it about a decade ago by Tom Cruise? Very forgettable episode if you have never really watched it. This was the first of Jodie Whittaker's New Year's specials that I actually watched live. I mentioned yesterday I didn't watch Series 11 or Series 12 directly as they aired because my family. Series 11 I was out at college. Series 12 my family had changed their cable package, so we were no longer getting BBC America. This was the first time that I actually watched it live on streaming. I watched Series 13 and then, of course, then the specials. Eve of the Daleks is fun. I think the supporting cast is very fun, but the plot is it's a very lackluster episode. It's a very, nothing really happens in this episode. It's Groundhog Day. It's not as funny as Groundhog Day. It's not as fun with the concept as Groundhog Day. Dan is fun as always. Yaz is there. 13th Doctor, but I think the what are the names of the side characters? I think their chemistry is fantastic. Eve of the Daleks stars Aisling B and Ajani Salmon as Sarah and Nick. I think they're very fun characters in this episode. As someone who has family back in Manchester, I like the fact that this episode takes place in Manchester. But otherwise, very C-tier episode. Very, very forgettable. It's more cohesive than Power of the Doctor, which is why I put it above Power of the Doctor, even though I had significantly more fun with this episode with Power of the Doctor. Tomorrow, I think, maybe tomorrow, it might take a couple days for me to put it all together, but I'm going to put together every single episode of Doctor Who and where all of these episodes fit, and I might actually rearrange some of them from what we have on the season episode tier lists. So I do apologize if in that video I end up switching these around, because I do have so much more fun with Power of the Doctor. But from a writing perspective, I think Eve of the Daleks is better and has more going for it in cohesion than Power of the Doctor. So that's why it's above in C tier. Let's move up then. We got 2 more episodes. Let's move up to B tier. And they're both in B tier. We're not going any higher than B tier, so it's very Series 13 and beyond, very middle of the road. But the lower one in second place, I have War of the Sontarans. War of the Sontarans is a fun episode. Apart from the fact that we have war with the Sontarans, what else happens in this episode? Swarm arrives at the temple, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so yes, we do have some temple stuff. This is basically it. We have 3 different timelines going on between the Doctor and the 2 companions. So the Doctor goes back into the Crimean War, which history has been rewritten by the Sontarans. The Sontarans are the best that they ever are in the revived series of Doctor Who. I mean that, genuinely. They are fun, but they are also threatening. We had fun, and we had threatening, but we never had both. And this episode gives us both. I think the design of the Sontarans is significantly better than it was in the original revival in Series 4. I think they feel more like a threat than they do in Series 4. I feel like they do comedy a lot better than they do with Strax, with the Paternoster Gang. I think the set design and the visuals of this episode are, for the most part, very good. There's that stuff with the visuals of the Doctor using the sonic screwdriver to signal a parlay. I think that looks kind of weird. But otherwise, for the most part, I give props to this episode visually. The Sontaran on the horse is one of the best things about Chibnall's era of Doctor Who. Chibnall does classic villains very well. Ignore the Sea Devil stuff. He does Daleks very well. He does Cybermen very well. He does the Sontarans very well. And this episode makes them threatening. I like all the stuff with Dan's parents back in Liverpool. I think that's a lot of fun. Dan and Carvanista together are a fun pair. And then the stuff with Yaz. It's Yaz. Like, I love Mandip Gill. I think Mandip Gill is a super underrated actress. I think she is fun to watch on screen, but she doesn't get a lot to work with ever. That's the problem with Yaz as a character, and that's the same case here, stuck at the Temple of Atropos. I think that's when she meets with Vinder, if I remember correctly. War of the Sontarans, just, yeah, very, very fun stuff. I like it. But better than War of the Sontarans is Village of the Angels. Village of the Angels is the best of... I would say Village of the Angels... I'd have to go back and actually look which ones I ranked where, but off the top of my head, which episodes of the Whittaker and Chibnall era do I like the best? I would say Village of the Angels is a top 5 episode. I think it handles the Weeping Angels very well. Even with the ending is weird. There's the 2 different sides of the Weeping Angels that are coming together in conflict. Jericho is a fun, who's the actor who plays Jericho? He's from Pirates of the Caribbean. Kevin McNally, who played Gibbs in Pirates of the Caribbean. He's very fun as Professor Jericho. Claire is a fine character. All of the stuff with the village, all of the stuff with the time stuff, I've never quite understood, but maybe I'm just not paying close enough attention. I'm trying to think, is there anything with Belle and Vinder in this episode that takes us away from the village? Yes, there's the stuff at the end. All of the stuff with Belle in this episode, I feel like it kind of kills the pacing of this episode, but everything else with the village is done very well. The horror of the angels is done very well. This is probably the scariest the angels are since Blink. I'm not even lying to you. I think the angels are better portrayed as horror villains or thriller villains in this episode than they are in Time of the Angels Flesh and Stone. I think the set design is very good. I think the 60s setting and the 1900s setting is very good. I like the acting in this episode. I think all of the side characters, not like the super side characters, but like Claire and Jericho specifically, have very competent motivations, and I think the writing supports them very well. This episode was co-written with Maxine Alderton, and I think she does a fantastic job with the script in this one, especially the fact that this was co-written with Chibnall. I feel like she took over in all of the right ways for the direction of this script. The cliffhanger ending, despite what it does to it's almost fan servicey to that theory that the Weeping Angels are just Time Lords after they die. I think it does damage to the angels from a I almost said from a theology, no, from a lore standpoint, but at the same time, so did Time of the Angels Flesh and Stone. So do most of the stories subsequent that include the Weeping Angels, but I think this episode does very well. I think the visuals are very good. To me, it's a B tier episode. So with that being said, the 9 episodes that we ranked today, in 9th place, we're down in D tier. Legend of the Sea Devils. Number 8, The Vanquishers. Number 7 is Once Upon Time. Number 6 is Survivors of the Flux. Move up to C tier. Number 5, The Halloween Apocalypse. Number 4, Power of the Doctor. Number 3, Eve of the Daleks. Move up to B tier. Then number 2, War of the Sontarans. And number 1, my favorite episode, what I believe is the best episode in the Series 13 Flux and the 2022 Whittaker specials, is Village of the Angels. So stay tuned. Tomorrow, like I said, hopefully tomorrow, otherwise hopefully within the next few days, I do a complete wrap-up of every single New Who episode. We'll do that first, and then I will get around to adding a video ranking all of the 3 60th anniversary specials and then adding them to that cumulative list. So stay tuned for that. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section below, whether or not you think Chibnall sucks, whether or not you love Chibnall, whether or not you want to come at this from a more grounded approach. That would be fantastic. Let me know in the comments section below. Link over bottom left hand of your screen to other Doctor Who videos. There's that 2-hour long Doctor Who timeline. Otherwise, all my other channels are above. Like, share, subscribe, do all that stuff, and we will see you very, very soon.